Mary Magdalene. Out of everyone in the story of Jesus, she may be the most misrepresented figure in the entire tradition. In our last video, we laid out the three vectors of faith: trust, belief, and practice, and we connected them to three people: Mary Magdalene, Thomas, and Stephen. Today, we slow down and give Mary the full treatment she deserves, and we start where we probably have to start, with the lie. For over 1,000 years, the Western Church presented Mary Magdalene as a repentant prostitute, a fallen woman redeemed by grace, weeping at the feet of Jesus, wiping them with her hair, forever defined by what she had done and what she had been forgiven for. That image is not history. It is a construction. In 591 CE, Pope Gregory I took three separate women from the Gospel accounts: the unnamed sinful woman in Luke 7, Mary of Bethany, the sister of Lazarus, and Mary Magdalene, and collapsed them into one person. One composite, one convenient story. And what that did was take the most prominent female witness to the resurrection and reduce her to a symbol of sexual shame and grateful subordination. The Eastern Church never did this. They kept the figures separate. This was a Western decision, and it was not an accident. Here is why it matters. How you define someone determines how seriously you take them. If Mary is primarily a reformed sinner, she is a symbol of mercy, grateful, subordinate, defined by what she needed to be saved from. But if Mary is who the earliest sources actually describe, a woman of means from Magdala, a devoted disciple who financially supported Jesus and his ministry, the first witness to the resurrection, someone Jesus trusted with direct and personal revelation, then she is something else. She is an apostle. And that creates a problem for a church that had already decided women could not hold that role. The Catholic Church did not officially correct this conflation until 1969, nearly 1,400 years of a false image. And even after the correction, the damage had already been done. Most people today still picture her the same way. So let's talk about trust, because that is what this video is really about. In the three vectors of faith, trust is not the same thing as belief. Belief is cognitive. It works with evidence and argument and reason. Thomas is the belief vector. We will get to him in his own video, and he needs to verify before he commits. That is not a flaw. Belief is a real and necessary way of engaging with faith. But trust is different. Trust is relational. It is a whole person orientation towards someone before all the evidence is in. It does not wait for certainty. It moves in the presence of uncertainty, and it is not the same as blind faith either. Trust is not the absence of doubt. It is the choice to stay oriented even while doubt is present. Now, before we go any further, I want to say something clearly, because we are about to look at some texts and traditions that placed Mary Magdalene at the very top, above the other disciples, the most prominent figure in the early community. We are not doing that here. In Neo-Eclectic Christianity, we are not replacing one distortion with another. We are not swapping the church's mistake of minimizing her for a different mistake of crowning her. What we are doing is simpler than that. We are putting her where the evidence actually places her and asking what that tells us. She represents the trust vector not because we hold her in special devotion, but because her story is the clearest picture we have of what trust looks like as a lived posture of faith. And when we draw from non-canonical texts alongside the canonical ones, we are not going Gnostic. We are being consistently red letter. If Jesus said it, it counts. That principle does not bend based on which community preserved the words or which council decided to leave them out. So watch what Mary actually does in the Gospel accounts. When Jesus is arrested, the disciples scatter. When the men are locked in a room after the crucifixion, she is moving. She goes to the tomb. Not because she has worked out a theology of resurrection, not because the evidence points that direction. She goes because she is oriented toward Jesus in a way that circumstances cannot stop. That is what trust looks like. It is not a logical conclusion. It is a gravitational pull toward someone even when everything visible says it is over. And then she becomes the first witness. In all four canonical Gospels, women are the ones present at the tomb, and Mary Magdalene is named in every account. In John, she is alone. She encounters Jesus and does not recognize him at first. He says her name, Mary, and she knows him immediately. He commissions her. Go and tell my brothers, she is sent. She is the first person to carry the news of the resurrection. The good news moves from Jesus to Mary to the disciples. That is the order. That is the structure of the story. And it is worth thinking about this question. Why would Jesus choose the first witness to the resurrection, the most significant moment in the entire story, and choose someone whose testimony would not even be considered legally credible in that culture, unless he was making a very deliberate point about whose trust he valued and who he chose to honor with that trust in return? Now, we need to talk about a text that gets a lot of reaction: the Gospel of Mary. Let me be straightforward about what it is. It was not written by Mary Magdalene. The earliest fragments we have date to the early 3rd century, and scholars generally place the original composition around 150 CE. That is well over a century after her death. But here is the thing. This is not unusual. The canonical Gospels are technically anonymous too. They were assigned names by tradition. Several New Testament letters have disputed authorship that scholars openly debate. We apply the same standard across the board. The Gospel of Mary was written by an unknown author or community that held her as a central theological figure. What the text preserves is how she was remembered. That matters. In the opening section of the Gospel of Mary, Jesus is present and teaching directly. He says sin is not an external category imposed from outside. It emerges when we act against our own true nature. He says attachment to the material world is the root of suffering. He commissions the disciples and says, "Peace be with you." These teachings sit comfortably alongside everything we know about how Jesus taught. They carry red-letter weight in this framework. But the most revealing moment in the Gospel comes after Jesus leaves. The disciples are falling apart, grieving, scared, not sure what to do, and Mary stands up. She steadies them. She turns their attention back to the teachings. She leads. Then Peter asks her to share what Jesus told her privately, things the rest of them had not heard. He says he knows Jesus loved her more than the other women. Mary shares a vision, a direct encounter with the risen Christ, where he teaches her about the soul and its journey. And then it breaks open. Andrew says he does not believe Jesus said any of this. Peter pushes harder. Did Jesus really speak to a woman privately and not to us? Did he prefer her? And Mary weeps. She asks Peter directly, "Do you really think I made this up? Do you think I am lying about the Savior?" Then Levi steps in. He tells Peter he has always been hot-tempered. He says, if the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her? The Savior knows her. That is why he loved her more than the rest of us. This is not a conspiracy invented by the Da Vinci Code. This pattern shows up across multiple early texts. In Pistis Sophia, Peter objects to how much space Mary takes in the conversation with Jesus. In the Gospel of Thomas, Peter says women are not worthy of the spiritual life, and Jesus corrects him directly. This tension is real, and it is documented. There were early Christian communities that remembered Mary as the closest disciple, the one most trusted, the one given direct revelation. And there were other communities, the ones who ultimately shaped the institution, who needed to push that memory down. Leaving the Gospel of Mary out of the canon was not a neutral editorial decision. It was a theological choice with consequences that lasted centuries. And so we come back to trust. Mary trusted Jesus when there was no rational basis left to do so. She stayed when others left. She moved when others froze. She was trusted by Jesus in return, named, sent, and chosen as the first carrier of the most important news in the story. And then the tradition that claimed to follow him decided her testimony was not worth preserving. That is not just a failure of justice. It is a failure of the very thing the tradition claimed to be built on. So here is the question I want to leave you with. The traditions that claim to follow Jesus made a deliberate choice to minimize the one person Jesus most visibly trusted, called by name, and sent first. Why do you think the institutions made that choice?